Hello, everyone. Today I'm taking a look at NieR Reincarnation. This is a weird one for me simply because, it has the NieR title tacked onto it. And, Yoko Taro, he kind of post-Automata, he started doing a lot of very different things. Of course, he said, I'm a shameless capitalist. I'm shilling out Tubi and as many crossovers while also trying to write schizo lore that makes them canon at the same time. I mean, I love the man, but, you had Sin of Alice first, which was, this one gacha thing. And, the whole inherent thing is that I really don't consider gacha games to be real games. There has to be a main story, being told there. And, Yoko Taro is, I would say, a master storyteller. So, when he makes a gacha game, it's very much on the fence, because gacha in my term is just, gambling. It's more or less the same thing, gambling for kids or another form of it. And then you're trying to tell a story through that. So, I don't know, it's an interesting combination. But NieR Reincarnation, well, it does actually tell a pretty decent story, I would say, but then it's kind of diluted by the fact it's a story about stories, and so everything is like a short story. So in the same way where you had weapon stories in NieR Drakengard, it's the same almost equivalent quality of stories where, like, there's a princess and then there's a guy and he wants to steal her heart, but she doesn't want to listen to him, and then he takes her from the castle, but then he's assassinated, and then there's some twist where it retells the story and turns out she was the assassin all along. So there, these are the kind of stories that are being told, and these stories actually are kind of in the context of this location or mechanism known as the cage. And so when you actually start the game, it's kind of decent. They have little explorable areas, little collectibles, but the main loop that you're being faced with is you are a young girl called Fio. I'm not sure if she has a name yet at the beginning, but that is her name. And she can't talk, and you are greeted by this ghost called Mama. And so basically you are being led through the cage, this weird architecturally distinct, really cool, honestly, place where essentially your job is to experience stories or dreams, essentially. And by experiencing these dreams and stories, you essentially retain those stories, those emotions, and also help them figure out the conflict in the story. So kind of in a weird way similar to Kingdom Hearts, there's going to be the telling of the story that or the way it should go, but then there's going to be something that interrupts it. So there'll be might be an antagonist, but maybe there are going to be things like a supernatural being that doesn't belong in that story, like the darkness or the heartless rather, that appears, and then you have to defeat that thing to essentially move on and restore the story to what it once was. And then the process, you get told the story as well. And so in the beginning, there are a bunch of side stories. There's one where you have to there's this guy in a Western setting, and it's to escort this kid to like a safe zone who's apparently some prince or something. There's one that's kind of like a Hogwarts themed thing where it's a love triangle where one girl likes this other girl, but she likes this boy, and then they have a falling out. What else were the other ones? You have this warrior princess, you have this father's a warrior on a mountain, you have this kind of Arabian Nights style story, and that's actually something I wanted to bring up. I'm not sure if I got this idea while playing this game or from somewhere else, but I like to think that The Legend of Scheherazade is actually the original gacha, and it's very much similar to this game, in the sense that you were essentially paying or indirectly doing experience or grinding to find out what happens next in the story. And so that's the way she kept herself alive, and what makes the prince end up marrying her, because she's able to tell such amazing stories that he just needs to know what happened next, so he can't kill her. So again, you go through the stories, and so what the actual combat is like is you'll be kind of thrown into this Final Fantasy like setting where everything is kind of active turn-based. All the characters will automatically attack, but you can press buttons and certain characters when their gauges fill up. I think there's like 3 different attacks that they can do kind of sort of like Overwatch, where they have their primary attack, sub attack, and then their final like attack, which is just, it's all on a timer. So you just have to pay attention to the screen and press the buttons when they light up, basically. And the music is very nice, so I will give it that. The music is very pretty, very Okabe-esque, and all of the characters, they level up, they grow, but of course eventually at some point they're going to make you end up grinding. And for a long time I was very confused because I think it was technically season 1, they ended not on a cliffhanger, but they ended kind of like before like the final boss, or they just kind of ended in a weird segment where essentially you're pulled out of the battle scenario, and Mama kind of gives you an outline of all these advanced mechanics, like rules and this tournament area and PvP and all this stuff. And I just thought, I have no interest in doing all this extraneous stuff for a collection of short stories essentially that I don't really care about. And so that's kind of where I ended off with Reincarnation, and then I just ignored it for like, I guess, a few years until apparently it ran out of money and shut down. Evidence of this being that, the first 2 seasons were fully voice acted in Japanese and English, but the final season, they could only afford it in Japanese. But yeah, no, that's basically the loop. You basically play as Fio, you explore the cage, you find a scarecrow or some kind of item that is cursed or has, part of the memory or story locked inside of it. You open it up, you get a little side-scrolling story where you move side to side. It's almost like a puppet show kind of thing with silhouettes. And then you have a little battle where your characters fight, and you get out of that battle and get rewards. And so like a proper gacha, it has rewards for login bonuses, completion bonuses, other things to get items to level up your characters, your items, and all the really, frankly scummy practices that gachas produce. But it's all told again in the context of really telling a bunch of compelling stories, and I found them to be subpar. I didn't find them to be super duper interesting. I found them to be similar to like the side stories in NieR and Automata, which would have like a fun twist in them or whatever, but nothing that I'd really consider pay worthy. I would pay if Replicant or Automata was toned in an episodic sense. I would absolutely pay for that content because it's so well done, and it doesn't just quite hit as hard in this game, which is appropriate for like a spin-off gacha game, I suppose. Of course, the other thing they had in this game is you could roll for other characters, I think also from NieR and Sinnoh Alice. But again, the gameplay is just, again, it's just a train for the story to evolve. And so about that, the overall story and structure and kind of reveal, if you will, about this game is that it has NieR in the title, but everyone's thinking, oh, is this really a NieR game? Because none of the characters are, there's no mention of similar characters or a continuation of the storyline and whatever. For a long time, I thought this is just whatever. And, in the first season, it's about Fio and Lavania, and the second season, it's about these 2 Japanese high school students. And the third season, they reveal the NieR component, which is their kind of final giveaway season. So, yeah, maybe before I just get to the big twist, I'll just talk about the general dynamics. I actually do kind of like season 1 somewhat, in the sense that you have this girl Fio and Lavania, and so Fio is a little girl and Lavania is this like horrific demonic monster that is essentially like going through the story with her and devouring these dreams so that apparently Lavania can become human. And so of course the big twist in that story is that it turns out that Lavania, when he eats all of these dreams of these other stories, and also the ones that the girl is having, he becomes the girl and she becomes the dream eater. So they just trade places. And so at first he's very, oh, I'm just doing this for myself. But when he realizes what he's done, he sets off on a journey to reverse it. And again, I really like the use of colors and black and white that Taro uses in his story here. And it's very similar to what we see in like NieR with the machines and the androids or the shades and the humans, that it's like, oh, the big old reversal that, this tragedy or this victory is actually a tragedy and whatnot. And in that same vein, so you have, that kind of play along with the colors. So in Automata, it was kind of like, oh, well, all the androids are wearing black clothes, and then actually, I don't think there was a reversal to that. But in this one, what happens is Mama is a black being wearing a white gown, while Theo is, I guess, a white being wearing a black gown, and Lavania is all black. And so it kind of, turns out that Mama is actually not as kind and as forthcoming as you once thought, and it's actually a little reversal. And Theo is actually not as she seems either, because when you start the game, you started as the reborn Lavania who can't speak, and he's basically going back through the dream world to restore Theo to her natural state. But because she can't speak, you have no idea what that's like, and it's very unnerving, of course, when she opens her mouth at the end of the midpoint of season 1 and she speaks with this demonic voice, and you're like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. It's a little creepy girl thing. So yeah, I thought that was a really cool story arc, a really nice reversal. How you had, this girl and the monster, and they kind of swap places, and at the end, they kind of, Lavania sacrifices himself basically to restore Theo, and that's kind of the end of their story. That's actually the peak of the series, honestly. And then they showed this big preview for season 2, and that's where I absolutely said, I am not playing that. I was just uninterested. Where you have a high school, Japanese boy student and a high school Japanese girl student, and again, I like what they actually did once I got into the story, where there's a reversal. The boy, I think he's following the moon or something within a cage, and multiple moons, and he's healing them, while the girl is following multiple suns and she's healing the suns. And it turns out that both these kids are from divorced families. The boy has essentially a very sick mother who, wait, hold on. Yeah, no, he has a very sick mother that he's trying to push himself through school, and basically almost kill himself so that to pay her medical bills. But she ends up dying anyway, and this girl has a deadbeat father who won't work and can't get a job, and so she ends up trying. She's a grade A student that turns off to selling drugs and a life of crime to support them, basically, so that she can also get into university. And the big reveal and the twist in that story is that they're actually a brother and sister, and they're from the same family despite their last names. And there's this whole arc where the boy goes and kills his father because he sees him as the weak link in the family that essentially allowed them to fall apart, that he caused the divorce. And the girl ends up goes and kills her mother that the boy's trying to take care of, because she views her as the weak link that caused the divorce and destroyed the family. And then they have a little reversal where you have a very much an A29S showdown fight between these two characters where they hate each other. And then you have once you get the two bad endings, you unlock the final ending, which is they reconcile and they say, well, you're actually my only family left, and everything's good, basically. And then finally season 3 rolls around, and then it tells you the big reveal, why this is called a NieR game. Well, And honestly, it was halfway through watching the video, because I didn't have the game anymore, to this season. I was like, I don't care. This is not worth it. This is not a good game. This is not a good experience. And then finally halfway through, they give the big twist, and it's like, oh, okay. Where apparently everything, the cage, is actually a construct on the quantum server of the moon. And you're like, oh, okay. So it's actually in the same timeline, technically, as the NieR Automata universe. And all these side stories are metaphors, essentially, for, the collection of human memories that are being stored on the quantum server on the moon. And so that's where it starts to get interesting, at least, where it turns out Mama is actually a pod who's, projected as a ghost into the, other world. And essentially that, I think, during / just right after the events of Automata, AIs and the machine network are kind of invading the quantum server on the moon. And I can't remember exactly, because I thought at the end of Automata, they definitely took the spaceship out of the city with all the memories of humanity, and I can't remember if like A2 downloaded that but there's still the quantum server on the moon is just there and they didn't pick it up. But I guess that must be it. The quantum server on the moon is just there and they just never bothered to pick it up on the way, I guess. But yeah. And so it's right after that they have, what are the remaining things of the cage and the machine network and how it's interacting. And what happens is that the data starts getting corrupted and whatever, and the machine network, and apparently an entity or an offshoot of N2's ego infiltrates the server and tries to destroy it. And so season 3 is all about how the cage is essentially falling apart, falling to pieces. And essentially you need to, all the side story characters all kind of have this Super Smash Brothers Marvel moment where they all team up and go through different parts of the cage trying to restore it. And then it's slowly revealed, oh yeah, this whole thing is actually a digital simulation within the server on the moon. You're like, okay, that's kind of cool. What I do, and I do like this part where we are introduced to technically the main-ish character. I mean, for the most part, it's been Fio and Lavania, and really Fio is the main character along with Mama. But what happens and occurs in this scenario is there's actually one android left alive on the surface of the moon that is responsible for maintaining the server, which is 10H. And so 10H, I mean, I love her design. I love her outfit. I love her attitude. And we're kind of introduced to her as like the main character, and then she just stops being the main character, where she's incapacitated by an attack on the server. And it felt like it was going such a fun, new, interesting direction, and then it kind of went back to all the side story characters. And so then what happens is in the last section of this game, you have a bunch of, again, the side story characters, and they're kind of retracing a bunch of other things in the NieR/Drakengard universe. So about, the emergence of Legion and the attack on Tokyo from Drakengard ending Yi. I actually really like that segment because it actually shows you more or less, because it's still in that 2D silhouette style, what Legion actually looks like. And it was actually really cool. It was like an angelic skeleton thing with this non-humanoid skull with red eyes. I was like, yeah, that's actually pretty great design. Actually, it'd be great to see those guys in a future game, in a full NieR game. And then you kind of move on to other things around. Oh, they don't mention Drakengard 2, obviously, but they mention the flower. They mention the side story about Accord. No, actually, they talk about Accord. Like, they mention her briefly, but they don't give her full story. In fact, it's a story within a story within a story, where one of the side stories is about this thief who's telling stories to this girl, like a reverse Sherazade, for him to leave with her. And one of the stories he tries to tell her to amuse her is about Accord. And so it's like, okay, well, Accord mentioned checkbox, in a NieR game, basically. But then they also mentioned things about, okay, what was the deal with NieR Replicant ending E with Kaine, and discovering the constructs of 9S and 2B kid versions inside there. And this is the one part of the game that's really, really interesting, because for me, I struggled a lot with analyzing ending E quite a bit, because I was confused as to exactly what was physical and what was digital. And so apparently in NieR Reincarnation, we kind of get a very definite description of that story, but from the perspective of a side story. And so the whole outlay of that is essentially, so from Project Gestalt, they create a quantum server with a exponentially increasingly intelligent AI. And so for this whole time, my main theory was that server inside the tree was some kind of quantum, but really like a mind-bending, or rather a time-bending server that was created from N2's network. I thought somehow it had reached into the past, but no, it's more like the because I thought the Gestalt program, as amazing as it was, it wouldn't have the technology to alter reality, but really I might have misinterpreted that, because what happens is Kaine goes into that facility and she ends up digitizing herself like 9S. I'm like, okay, so it's not saying that the entire framework of reality is actually a matrix-like system, but what it is saying is that within the quantum capabilities and, untapped potential of the Gestalt program, you have this quantum server that's able to see all past and future of humanity, which is why they have knowledge of all these past and future events. And you're like, oh, okay, that actually does kind of make sense. But so it doesn't have control over reality, but it has perception into all possible timelines, or most possible timelines, as, they infamously say when Kaine defeats and ends their server, that all of time is converging into one definite point that they had not foreseen yet, which is really interesting. But here's the part where they explain it. I'm like, okay, sure. They explained that apparently when Kaine destroys that little tree layer thing and the server, and the flower appears, apparently they only defeated the boy AI, and the 2B girl AI was left behind, and then it kind of went corrupt from loneliness, and that she was actually created from the original boy AI. And they were kind of going with a Garden of Eden-ish kind of story here, so that he wouldn't be lonely. But she just was made from him spontaneously, and that's the only like Edenic reference that exists, besides the whole fact of the little matrix story place that they live in to be a kind of paradise. But sadly, that they didn't really go far with that kind of Genesis parallel, essentially. And so apparently, yeah, she was made from, but yeah, no, apparently she was made almost a one-to-one replica from the boy AI, with no, issues or anything. And so now that he's gone, she doesn't know how to create a copy of herself, and she's going kind of resentful and crazy inside the quantum server holding humanity's memories. And she's lonely and depressed, but I guess she's not destructive. She won't disobey her programming. And it's only until the point post-Automata where apparently a remnant of N2's ego split finds itself into that server on the moon somehow, because I thought it was the whole point that she was trying to get to the moon. She gets there and she integrates herself, her AI, with the other girl, so finally they can never be alone. But it's not like they want each other's company. It's kind of like, because they've been through so much, they need to take on each other's pains or sins or whatever. And so they become one entity, half human AI, half alien AI, which is, kind of cool. And you have this new entity, essentially. And she is a combination of the red girl and essentially, I guess, this 2B-ish AI. And so she's the one that is responsible for deleting the records and taking down the system. And so you have this kind of, last minute thing where Theo, another essentially program or memory within the human server, is like, oh no, you don't have to be alone, like anything is possible, and stuff like that. And I guess I didn't actually question this after seeing it, but what happens is that the AI basically says, oh, I should move to another branch, which again gives us the insight that, okay, there is definitely something similar to this quantum server and Accord and that whole other timeline business. And so essentially she's like, okay, I'm just going to jump to another branch, another timeline, essentially. And it does kind of mention that, in the side story about the AI inside the tree in NieR Replicant, that it says history has repeated or moved in on itself or gone over on itself, which are exactly the words I used to predict exactly or analyze what ending E was. And I thought that was our first point of evidence that, oh, there's this thing that's from the past and the future integrated into one area. So this is evidence of a higher level civilization that is monitoring and trying to save the threads of existence, so to speak. So regardless of that, she's like, okay, I'm going to jump to another branch, and Theo reaches out and touches her, and maybe you have to go back and watch this, but she's inside this crystal thing, and somehow they undigitize and turn into silicon carbon entities outside the cage. And there's this whole thing, which again is hard to swallow, which is that post the events of Automata, after the thing collapsed, the tower, allegedly what has occurred is that the cage is actually a reflection of Earth, and that all this weird alien architecture is actually based on the architecture of the aliens' homeworld, and it was all built spontaneously after that whole collapse of the tower, and this is the last remaining thing. And I'm like, well, made by what? Because it says the machines are all gone, and the androids apparently. And if you follow NDE, I guess technically 2B and 9S are still there. So again, what built this incredibly elaborate dynamic structure? And like, I don't know. So they don't explain that. And just the fact that that the cage is reflecting the Earth and like not the other way around or something. It's just okay. I guess I'll believe that. But anyway, Theo and this new girl, which I'll call N2B, I guess, they wake up amidst the ruins of the destroyed cage, which has fallen apart, and they kind of live on Earth as these two, I guess, semi-immortal beings, depending on what they're made out of, while the quantum on the server on the moon seems to be in total repair, essentially. And this is really interesting because at the very end of the game, or the video, it shows that in the game files, if you go to look at the profile of all the characters, including Theo and all of Theo's like alternative costumes and whatever, they're all blurred out, and it basically says, oh, Theo has left the cage. She has been reincarnated. And so her and this AI, essentially, they fulfill the title of the game, where they've been reincarnated into the real world, and their data from the cage is technically lost because they left the network. And that's how the game ends. And you're like, okay, all right, that's cool. So I mean, the good and bad parts of this are that I'm glad it, I guess, added a little bit more context to some of the previous events we've seen in the NieR series. It added a few more, stories and context and scenarios. I think seeing, 10H, that was a cool, like, little segment, like, oh, cool, yeah, no, okay, I will learn about this character and her design and everything. I talked about the quantum server on the moon, and it kind of added a little bit to Automata. And that is also the bad part, that it only adds a little bit. Yeah, I've heard some people try to argue and say that this is like the next big NieR, like this is like a proper sequel, this is NieR 3, and I just it's like, no. this adds almost nothing. It adds like 1%, if that, to the story. No, this is exactly what it seems like. It's a gacha side story game, and it's fine, because there are people out there who want to consume every piece of NieR lore. And I remember back when NieR was like new, before Automata came out, people were saying, oh, well, have you heard the audio CDs that were shipped with this random tie-in with another Square Enix game, or this other thing, or this live action play with the androids, which I did watch. But there's some media out there that, even if it's canon and it adds to the story, if it's not something super duper important, I mean, it's one thing to like make a bunch of stuff and say it's all interconnected, but if it's not really adding anything to my enjoyment of NieR, then why bother? Yeah. And again, I really do like Fia Lavania and Mama. I think that was a really well thought out core character dynamic, adventure dynamic. I really liked how they did that switcheroo, and it made it very iconic. But how they tie that all up and try to add it to the NieR universe just felt kind of forced a little bit or sloppy. It's like, sure, I guess, why not? But that's my point. This isn't a proper sequel to NieR. It adds a little bit, but nothing huge. In the same way that the NieR tie-in for Final Fantasy XIV with those raids, or even ending Eve for Replicant, it was like 99% the same game, and then it added 1%. But honestly, I would say the ending to Replicant was very interesting and very impactful, and really made for people who just didn't play the first game. So that's a little bit understandable. But this one, I can't. It's kind of like, and the same scenario that I would say, look, you don't have to replay the original NieR and get all 4 endings again just to, experience 2 hours of gameplay. Just watch it on YouTube. Just like bite the bullet. And that's what I'd say with this game now, especially since apparently the servers are shut down. You have no choice but to just, watch it on YouTube. That's just how it is. Yeah. And outside of that, there's no there's no gameplay. You're pressing buttons as they light up. You're doing gacha rolls. I mean, I don't think it justifies the gacha system. It's very much like, all right, well, yeah, that was kind of neat. That was kind of cool. But again, none of these side stories are like, oh, well, I'm in love with this character, or this is such a cool idea. It's very much like, okay, that was fine. And so, as a hardcore NieR fan, I guess maybe you could watch this on YouTube and maybe get some appreciation for it. But I would actually categorize this as skippable content. It's not required to know any of this. There might be a reference to it in a future NieR game, like if the proper sequel to Automata comes out, they might have a reference and a throwback to maybe one of these characters like Mama or N2B or Fio or Lavania, but I just don't see it making a major impact on the franchise and the IP as a whole. Anyway, that's pretty much all my thoughts in this game. I'm always, very ecstatic and fun to engage with Taro's works. I just don't feel this is as like a major work. It's definitely one of his minor works, but it exists, I guess. Anyway, guys, that's all I gotta say. I'll see you later. Bye.